Just like that. Okay.
Yeah,
All
just
right.
talk to us, man. Who are you?
Sure. Okay. Well, my name's Ryan Vermilyea, and my wife Kim and I have been married for a little over 13 years now. And we've lived in Live Oak for about 7.5 of that. I serve as the Minister of Students and Education at First Baptist here in town. And we have 3 kids. Caroline is 10, Carter is about to turn 8, and Brady is 2, almost 3. He'll be 3 at the beginning of next year. And so, like I said, we've been married 13 years. We lived in North Carolina for a little while, lived in Georgia while I served there in a church. And but we have lived here in Live Oak for ever since February, March, that area, 2010. And so gotten to know a lot of people through our homeschool group and through our church, and just been formed a lot of good friendships that way.
So obviously this is a podcast about homeschooling and homeschooling dads,
Right.
and how dads can get be more involved in their family's homeschooling. So why did your family start homeschooling? What was the reason? What was your big?
Sure, that's it's an interesting story because we were talking about this earlier. Well, I grew up as a homeschool student. My parents decided that I was, as the oldest, when I came along, finally was of school age. They made the decision that they wanted to begin homeschooling with me, and then as well they homeschooled my 3 younger siblings. And so that just kind of was a way of life for us. We gathered around the table every morning, and so that was what I grew up with. That was normal to me. That was kind of what I knew all the way through high school. Going to college was a reality check for me in many ways, because I never sat in a classroom before, and so that was a whole different experience. And so that being kind of my background, when Kim and I started dating, she was teaching public school at the time. And so that was what she had gone to college for. She had an education degree, and she had 3 years already teaching first grade under her belt when we were dating and when we got married. And so right before we got married, all of a sudden we had this time where we realized, hey, wait a minute, you're teaching school, but I come as background of a homeschool student, and so what's this going to look like in the future? And so we basically, in talking one night, she said, are you going to insist that our kids are homeschooled? And I said, no, not necessarily. And then I said, are you going to insist that our kids are not homeschooled? And she said, no, not necessarily. I said, we're good then. We can figure this out later on. And so I was in seminary and working part-time. She taught again for another 3 years while I was in seminary. And so she was finishing up her 3rd year teaching 4th grade in Raleigh, North Carolina, when we found out, or actually when Caroline was born, our first daughter, or our only daughter, our first child. And so she has stayed home with Caroline throughout her time growing up, and I served in a church. And then as she got closer to the time where we realized we needed to make a decision about what's happening, we just started thinking about what we wanted for our kids. My 2 brother-in-laws and their family both were involved in a homeschool group similar to what we do now, and so we had kind of some influence from them in talking about and kind of hearing them share about what their experience was. But really, homeschooling for us, when we talked about it, came down to more than just the education of it. We saw, and as a homeschool student, I understood well the idea that my parents wanted to instill in me, the education that they wanted to. And so, they designed whatever curriculum it was, pulled together all the things. And so that the education was a big thing. And I think for my own upbringing, just as much, it was an idea of really protecting from that public school environment. That the decision for me and my siblings to be homeschooled was just as much that we wanted to, or that they, as my parents, wanted to make sure that I had the right kind of influences, that I wasn't getting involved with the wrong crowd, and that almost just making sure that I was kind of, for lack of a better term, sheltered or protected from those things. But when Kim and I had the discussion about what we were going to do, it kind of went a little bit of a different direction. We understood about the education, and in a large part, that's why you homeschool, is because you want to have that influence and that ability to choose the direction of education for your kids. But at the same time, we realized that it goes far deeper than that, because we we wanted the chance to be able to not just be involved in their education, but also in their development as a person, and realizing that were they to go to a public school or to a private school and come home, we'd have 4 or 5 hours with them in the afternoon, and that it just wouldn't allow the time for us to be able to spend with them and to invest in them, the character qualities and the things that we wanted for our kids. And so, homeschooling, because of that, goes deeper than the education. We see that we want to have that time with them so that we're able to pour into them and to invest into them, so that we know that that we are raising them in the way that we feel that God leads us to do. And so homeschooling allows us the chance to kind of follow the curriculum that we feel is best for our kids, and we feel like can be tailored towards their own level of understanding, whether it's we need to go slower in some ways or be able to go a little more advanced if we see they're excelling in a certain area. But just as much, it's the idea that we're able to, when we're around the house, model for them good character qualities, and then as well be able just to give that instruction that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise if we were getting a few hour chunks here or there mixed in with any extra sports or homework or other things like that sprinkled in the non-school hours that they would have if they were involved in school and in public school. And so it really just comes down to that we wanted the time to be able to really just, it comes down to it, to be able to disciple our kids. And we felt like homeschooling gave us that chance to be able to have the time. And then as well, just the added bonus of being able to kind of design that trajectory for where their education would go into the future.
That was a very thoughtful answer.
That's great.
Sure. No, really, I think that was great. A lot of things. Sometimes you started with with your parents, and their purpose was to protect you. Right. I think every dad. I think that
obviously wants to protect. Yeah.
There's a protection element.
Absolutely right.
And you came at it from an educational element as well, but also that there's only so many hours in your kid's life, and it sounds like you've chosen to be a part of as many of those hours as possible. That's kind of what I was.
Yeah, exactly. It's because each one of us has those choices of how we're going to spend the time. We got the priorities that we put in place, and so it's while the kids are still under our authority at home, and we're able to kind of decide some of those priorities for them. It was just a great way that we could say, hey, we feel like this is important enough for us to say that we want to have maximize the time that we have with them while they are at home. And for us, that looked like having them home and being homeschooled.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask something as far as you mentioned that you grew up as a homeschool student, which I think is unique because Stephen and I are like first generation homeschool dads, second generation, I guess.
Yeah.
So you have a great perspective on growing up and the effects that that's had on you as an adult. And so now you can kind of look and see how you want to homeschool your kids.
Sure.
So maybe could you touch on kind of the model like that your parents used, how that worked out for you, maybe the goods and bads, and kind of what you've taken from that and what you do for your kids?
Sure. Well, the model, I guess by that you're talking about the curriculum itself, or
because there's probably 100 different ways kind of you can homeschool.
Sure.
And so kind of what did they use? What do you guys currently do, and maybe the things you're able to take from that?
Well, a lot of what we did growing up was just using a standard curriculum from a company. Abeka was big in my house. That was for until we were older. Pretty much all it was on the shelf of school stuff. And so whether it was for grammar or for math or for whatever it might be, it was all a standard curriculum like that. And so that's good. And then we had. As we grew older, the math kind of changed and morphed into a little more as we got deeper into pre-calc and calculus and things like that. We switched to some other companies or some other curriculum sources, but it was really a curriculum based education. Mm-hmm. And so, which nothing wrong with that at all. It's just the style that they used growing up. What we do now. Is called classical conversations, and really it's a classical way to look at homeschooling, look at education, and it really is more of a long-term view on what education is as a whole. And so rather than saying this is what we need for this moment or this time, this current grade they're in, a classical education says, what is my end goal? What am I trying to achieve? And then what can I do right now that's will move them a little bit closer to that goal? And so when we go through the education that we have now and homeschooling our kids at home, there's not as much quote unquote curriculum, so to speak. There's still the learning that's taking place, and there's still the education that's there, but it may not always mean that they're opening up a textbook that has 180 lessons in it, one for each day of the school day or the school year. But it begins now. The classical education begins as they're in the elementary ages, planting kind of the seeds of the different elements of learning, and so trying to just plant some ideas of realizing what the end goal is at the end, which, as I said, it fits perfectly with where we feel our convictions are, because the end result of the classical model that we're in, this Classical Conversations program, is that they may be able to be faithful followers of Christ, are able to live out their faith and to be able to defend their faith and be able to share why they believe what they believe. And so it begins now with them learning basically the facts, whether it be history facts or science facts or mathematics or things like that. They don't get it all right now because they're just facts, and they can't really understand when it comes to science, why these are all parts of the skeletal system and how they all work, but they know this is the facts that I'm learning. So that later on, as they get older, we're able to then go back and to look at, okay, well, how did God make the body? So that we're able to see, whether it's to do with the skeletal system, or how do these events in history that I learned about in third or fourth grade, how do they play into where our country is now, or be able to see the bigger picture. And as a part of that, they begin to learn as well to take what they've learned and to then defend that or to teach that on to somebody else, which again, the end goal of that is to be able to help them to grow as believers and to be able to defend what they believe spiritually. And so it's a very different model from what we had growing up. I don't think necessarily at all that the curriculum-based approach was wrong, and it wasn't like I just defected from that. It's just as we looked at what we wanted for our kids, we saw this in some of our other family and friends that they had begun this program, and we thought, man, it looked like a great method for us to be able to accomplish what our overall convictions were for our family.
Sure.
One thing I'd like to follow up on that, because you grew up homeschooled, and you had, as a kid, like this image of what it's like to quote unquote go to school, even if it's
Yes.
kitchen table or whatever.
Sure, right.
What in a very functional way, like a very practical way, what did a day-to-day look like as a kid in homeschooling? Because what I was picturing was very much like a public school classroom, but at home. Because like you'd open a textbook and you'd like, okay, this is the next 30 minutes. We're going to do science. The next 30 minutes.
You're saying as when I was growing up.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what I
Sure.
saw in my head. How does that differ than kind of a day-to-day, like maybe compare and contrast, maybe
with back then versus now kind of thing. Well, back as a student growing up, my mom planned what our week would look like, down to the pages that I would read, the lessons that I would do, and I had a sheet that I basically would work through as a checklist, which works great for me because I'm a list guy, and so we didn't have an official start time, but we knew that by 8:30, something like that, we were kicking the day off. What I remember most vividly is the later years when really I was more on my own. Less instruction needed, more learning from either the lesson guide or whatever might be prepping me for whether it was math or reading through the history textbook or something like that. So in many ways it was a lot like the classroom in that it was segmented for here's science, here's history, here's math, and there was time devoted to that, and lessons planned out and organized like that. Not that what we do now isn't organized, but it was more of the classroom in that respect. How it differed from the classroom basically was when I completed whatever the history assignment was for the day, that was it. I could move on to something else. It wasn't like I had to wait for the bell to ring or for others to finish the quiz before we moved on. So it was again more geared to just the pace that I was working at. And so, but it was, all eventually four of us gathered around the dining room table. We all had our own spots, our own workspaces, and typical day would just be my mom helping my younger brother and younger sister, and my older sister and I just working at our own pace, doing the things we needed to do, asking for help when we needed it. But it was that's kind of what I remember our time looking like that. Contrasted by how that looks now. A lot of it is similar. Kim does a great job of planning and kind of laying out the day. But there's a lot more focus on what they're learning in their classical conversations time. And so whatever their history fact for the week might be, or science or whatever, maybe there's some additional learning or additional research done in that particular area. But right now there's no science textbook. There's no history book that they're opening up and reading about different things that happen. There's really, as I said before, there's just those facts that they're picking out, maybe digging a little deeper into knowing a little bit of the background behind that, but just learning those facts, basically what they're learning without even realizing it is the multiplication tables and things like that, kind of hanging those pegs on the board so that later on when we go back, the dots can be connected from one to the other. And so I think if you were to put what my education was like growing up side by side with what my kids look like now, but you'd see the curriculum from my upbringing, and then you would see just really the planting of the seeds for what we will go back and revisit in future years as the kids grow. We see the idea of education, the way that we are envisioning it, and the way that we see the model lived out is not, we're going to do this and then we completely change next year. It's something that we see that takes them all the way through high school. And so by laying those things out now, it just allows us to be able to put some things in place for the future. And so it's exciting to see how it's a part of the process of them growing and kind of developing as they get older and advance through the grades.
One of the things I noted when you were talking about the difference was the way I pictured that was kind of your upbringing was curriculum based, and CC seems to be kind of framework based.
Yes.
So like, look, we're gonna set up this framework for how you learn things, and then once you've got that framework down, you know how to learn. You can literally learn anything. Yeah,
that's a great way. That's a great way to look at it. Yeah, it's really teaching them not just things, but it's teaching them, as you said, it's teaching them how to learn. And so that I think that enables them not just for something they might learn, but it's a life skill that they could go back and be able to then say, hey, I'm going to want to devote time to understanding this more. And really it's the way that they can learn now to teach themselves and then be able to take what they've learned and to pass that along to somebody else. So yeah, it's a great way to look at it, that it's really sets a framework up there to be able to evaluate not just a subject, but really all of life versus more of a curriculum based of this is, X, Y, and Z that we work through as we go.
There's something I want to touch on, the way you talked about that. When you were talking about your history, and kind of comes to the core of this podcast, the point of this show. You described homeschooling as a kid, and conspicuously absent was the sound of dad.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
And when you described today,
sure,
conspicuously absent was, and this is my role.
Right.
So, and that's what this show's about. It's really about digging in. What does it look like as a dad to do homeschooling?
Sure.
Because most of us, and I'd like to hear your version of this, but most dads are, quote unquote, at work when school's done.
Right.
And then they come home, and I know in my experience, it's you come home and I get to play with the kids because school's done. So
you could be the fun guy. You come home.
Yeah, I'm not the fun guy. And my wife is like, just give me a break, or whatever. But
yeah.
So because you didn't say, well, this is how mom did and this is what dad did.
Right.
Did your dad have a role in your homeschooling?
We always called my dad the principal
Awesome.
because he was the disciplinarian. It was you wanted to make sure that whatever happened, you didn't have to get dad involved with a lot of the things. Not because he wasn't interested in the education, but it's the idea that he was why did this go down the way that it did today, you know? So, but yeah, I will say that my dad got more involved the older that I got, because quite honestly, math was a stronger place for him than for my mom. And so that became kind of our thing was math was really where he helped me through a lot of that. That would involve then me kind of putting some things aside and waiting, because like you said, he was at work, he wasn't at the house. So it may have involved me putting some things aside and said, hey, we'll come back to that once he's gotten home and we can look through it. But yeah, so it was, mom was a stay-at-home mom, and dad worked probably 45 minutes to an hour away from the house. And so, it wasn't coming home at lunch, and it was, leaving at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and getting home about 6 o'clock. And so, but we just would have to carve out some time after he got home to be able to look through some of those things. And so most of it, though, was done while he was gone. And so, yeah, it was that's kind of how that looked. As far as today, and what it looks like at home, one of the great things is I live real close to where I serve at the church, and so lunch is an easy thing for me to go home and to spend that time. And really, homeschooling allows us to basically eat every meal together every day, except for times when maybe there might be an event or something going on that obviously I'm not home for, but it allows us that time. But particularly what my involvement is, it requires a lot. And I thought, as I was thinking through this, realizing that's probably one of the directions you were going to go in, it requires a lot of really intentionality, is what it is. Because I will go ahead and just be completely honest with you and tell you this is nothing that I've gotten figured out yet. It's still in many ways that I try to figure out how can I be involved. When we set goals, we on New Year's Eve, we set goals for the year. Each one of us wrote down some fun things that we said, hey, we wanted to accomplish during the year. And the kids said, I wanted to be able to go someplace or learn how to ride my bike by myself or something like that. And one of the things that I wrote down is I want to be more involved in my kids' school. And I think I can look back and see that that's been improving this year, but I'm still a long way away from where I want to be. But it just comes down to, because of not being at home, that just means that I have to be more intentional when I am home to say, hey, tell me about the day. Tell me what you did. It helps that the kids are excited about what they're doing, because then if there's a project they're working on, or maybe a presentation they're getting ready for their Thursday community meeting, then they're excited about that. And they want to, hey, Dad, listen to this, or look at this, or can you help me with this? Right before I left to come here, I was helping Caroline because she said, hey, there's some math things that I need help with. So, it's just taking those opportunities, but it is just as much as something you said earlier, and realizing that how I support homeschooling in my home is just as much about how I support Kim as it is about how I support the kids. And so, again, not that I speak from doing this the right way, but realizing as I've looked at it, just as much as needing to give her the space she needs to make sure that she has time to get things together and organized. And sometimes that means the best thing is that I can just take the kids and give her that time where there's no little ones underfoot, or no other things happening. There's just a bit of quiet time where she's able to kind of get the plan together for the week, or since she directs the community, together for what that week will look like at CC. So yeah, it's just as much about how I can help serve her as it is about being intentional about making sure that when I am home that I have some interest that I'm showing to the kids. And like I said, they're at that age right now where there's just that excitement about, hey, I'm learning this, or did you know this, or they love singing the history songs and doing all those things. And so it's great to be able to do some of that with them. But again, intentionality is the key to that, because if you just are passive and step back, which I have to fight against at times, but when you're passive and you step back, you begin to see that divide where this is my life over here and this is my wife and kids at home homeschooling. And so, but it requires just being intentional to saying, I want to bring this together. I don't want there to be a divide. I want to be a part of what's going on in their life, because I realize that that's my role as dad, is to help encourage them in that way. And so, but I think that we're we're working on that. We're seeing improvements there, and still finding out how I can do more to support the kids and to support Kim.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but you mentioned
Go
as
ahead.
far as the New Year's goals, like I want to spend more time with my kids, and I
Yeah.
think that's probably something every homeschool dad has said. It's like I want to spend more time.
Yeah,
But the problem I found for myself is that's a very ambiguous statement.
sure.
And so maybe for you on your goals, did you have like, okay, and I want to spend more time with my kids, and that means, whatever, I'm going to read Carter a story every night, or I'm going to go take Brady out and play with him for 15 minutes every day. And maybe if not, are there some things you found where you say, okay, if I can meet these, then I'll be happy.
Sure.
If I can hit this point, that's it.
Well, we did not have that listed out with the initial goals. They were just really, if you look at the back of my front door, they're just little stars that are put
Sure.
all over the thing. And so we wouldn't have had all the goals and objectives of all the things to be able to fit on that. But so yeah, but it did require a little more thought, because if you just leave it at the general, I want to be there more for my kids, then it may or may not actually happen. So really, it just what it came down to is realizing that I needed to be, and it may not be as general as what you're asking, but just in realizing that as for example, Caroline's getting more advanced with some of her writing and some of her grammar. And so being more involved, knowing what it is that she's learning, I found is huge, because if they have a whole spread of things that they're learning and all, but I'm ignorant of all what that is, then it really makes it difficult for me to say, hey, tell me about school. But if I can say and be able to even quote back to them some of the things that they're learning, or some of the songs, or some of the grammatical things that they're doing in class, or as she reads to me her presentation for the week, if I'm able to kind of help offer some constructive things, but that fall in line with the teaching, so that she knows I'm there with her on that, then that's huge as far as in her eyes, of knowing that Dad's not just this aloof guy who comes home and just endures sitting down and going through this stuff. But
That's such a good word for that.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
perfect.
Just but that's the perception that I want to fight against. Is I want my kids to know that just because I'm not home doesn't mean that I don't support what's happening. I want them to know that I'm very much behind it. And so it is. I do see it's important to be. Even though I might ask them, "What are you learning?" It's just as important to be able for me to look at it for myself, so that I know what's going on, whether or not they tell me. But merely me asking them kind of begins that discussion and gives them a place to say, hey, here's what's going on. So, but yeah, finding out where they are and actually taking the time to read through some of the stuff they're reading through has helped a lot this year, of being able to say, I think it's at least a little better than it's been in years past, of saying that I feel like a little more involved, a little more able to offer some things, or to invest in the kids, knowing that comes naturally to Kim because she's home and she sees this happen. So it just requires me to be intentional to read through some of that, or to kind of have an overview of what's happening, so that I can be able to answer and offer some things.
As a kind of a tactical way to dig into that a little bit, what is that? So, not everyone who's listening to this is going to be a part of the CC community and going to be aware of
Sure.
how that works.
Sure.
But how would you advise someone to actively become involved? Do you meet with Kim? Do you guys talk? Do you have set time to say, okay, what are you doing this week? What are you doing this month?
Sure.
Or do you just open her notebook and say, I wonder where they are? What is in a practical way, how do you prep to know what the kids are doing?
To know what they're doing.
Yeah.
What I have done, and I'm not saying it's the perfect way, I'm just telling you what I've done, and that is usually Kim has already gotten the plan set out for the week. And so I know, and if I can keep track of what week it is, the way that the classical conversations works is it operates by week. And so there are certain things that they learn each week. And if I can keep up with where they are and at least kind of go through and listen to what some of the things that they're going to learn, then that goes ahead and exposes me to that. But at the same time, going back and looking at what her plan is, because there are some things that we use to supplement what CC does. And so, whether it's the things that they're working on in math, there is a math textbook that they use. There's spelling, there's handwriting and the grammar, that's the essentials and things like that they'll do outside of just the regular CC work. And so for me to then take the sheet that she has, that Kim has already planned out, and then look through and see, okay, well, this week they're going to be, doing these lessons, or reading over this material, or looking at these facts in the CC model, then that's primarily what I've done. There have been times when Kim has said, hey, we're going to be looking at this, can you help me with this, or can you think of an idea about this? But a large part of it has just been me going back and saying, okay, what is it they're going to do? And then on my own, taking, whether it's the 3-ring binder that has the lessons in it, or, a math book or something like that, and just trying to look ahead and see. And so it's not as structured, I guess, as it could be, but it has worked up to this point. So
going back to the goal, because I think that's good advice. Basically, you mentioned earlier intentionality.
Yeah.
And it sounds like if you set a goal like, I want to be more involved. Right. One way to do that is to know what's happening. If you don't know what's happening, you can't be, right? Right. So I think that's fantastic. I think the takeaway there is, as a dad who isn't actively involved in the quote unquote schooling, sure, or the day-to-day grind of teaching, right? The lesson could be, okay, be aware of what they're learning, right? So that when your wife says, hey, I need help with XYZ, you're not like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. Sure. Or when the kids come and, like you said, so you're not enduring it. And I want to dig into a little bit of that too. But this idea of like just knowing kind of what's happening, I think that's great.
And I think that encourages Kim as well, because then she doesn't feel like that I have just put her out here on this island, and every once in a while I come out there and tinker a little bit in the things that's going on, and then I leave and go back. Yeah, I do enough to stir up trouble, and then I get to leave, and she handles whatever I leave. But I think that encourages her, because then she sees it's not just her alone. That it is, although I might not be physically present when this is going on, it's something that I support what's happening when I'm not there, and that I'm actively a part of when I do get to be there. And so it's a way that not only the kids see that it's important to me, but that I hope that me being intentional about knowing what's going on encourages her to see that I'm excited about it, and that I support it, and that I want to do what I can to be involved.
In a real way, yeah.
Yeah.
So I have 2 follow-ups, and I'll let you choose which you talk about.
Okay, great. That. Yeah.
So, because they're both kind of intimate.
All right.
I'm curious, what were some of the other goals you guys set on New Year's Eve? And a second thing, what advice would you have to other dads? How can you be excited about what your kids are talking about when you come home?
Sure.
Or how can you feign excitement enough to
convince them? Take it till you make it.
Well, I think many times you have to either do a great job of feigning, or the kids are going to see through it anyway. So how you go about being excited, I think you see, at least when you come at it from the perspective that we're coming at it, you see the end goal in mind, and you see what they're moving towards, and you see how what they're learning now is moving them in that way. And so while knowing that Martin Luther started the Reformation in 1517 may not particularly cause you to run outside and jump up and down and scream and woohoo, you realize that is hanging a point in history on a pegboard for them to be able then to come back and to connect with things that happen around it, and to be able then to connect it to the future. And so even if it's hard to get excited about the mundane day-to-day lessons, I think it's important to see, and maybe one of the practical things is realize that what your kids now is kind of setting things in place for them for the future, and realizing that's a step in the process of them growing. And so if you can't get excited about Martin Luther, be excited about the direction your kids are headed, and realizing that that there's some tremendous things happening in their life, and your excitement, I think, is directly related to their continuing interest in it. And so I do think it's important for there to be some excitement or some motivation from dad, because if they're getting instruction from mom and they're getting just whatever from dad, then I think that there's some conflicting ideas there that come to the kids, and maybe they wonder, are both my parents really behind this idea, or is this mom just doing what she wants to do and dad's going along with it because he's okay with it? So, I think it's important for kids to see the excitement from the dads, and I think that comes maybe from just the idea of realizing what homeschooling is producing in your kids day by day as you go through it. So, as far as the other, what did you ask?
Were there any other?
The other things. Well, Brady's goal was to be able to dress himself.
That was his or yours?
Well, that was Kim's for his.
Okay,
that was
awesome.
Kim's for his.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember what some of the others were. I had written down run a 5K with the kids, and we haven't done that. But I also wrote down visit a new state together, and we did that. We went to Louisiana this year, so that was neat. So I'm trying to remember what some of the other ones were. The kids always come up with some random ones.
I think that's another practical thing that we could encourage other dads listening to do is set goals, like whether it's New Year's Eve, it doesn't matter. I don't know when in the year it matters, but as a family setting goals, I think that's great, especially if you're asking the kids to contribute their own.
And I think too of that, like some concrete, attainable goals. Like, okay, this year we're going to go visit another state. Not like we're gonna backpack across Europe. Maybe like
that was my one for next year.
That was, okay.
So
That's
how
cool.
did you know?
It's aspiration.
Yeah, that's it.
But I think that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna ask. You had mentioned kind of one of your parents' thoughts of homeschooling is the kind of protection element, which we still kind of hear that argument some. And I think probably you have maybe a unique perspective as a homeschool dad, but also a youth pastor. So you have some heavy influence, or maybe some views into kind of both environments as far as a homeschool kind of co-op group that you're a part of, but also spending time with kids who are most likely involved in public school.
Sure.
So kind of in that light, do you still kind of agree with the like protection element, or how's that maybe your view on that?
I think you can look at it from the protection of that. I mean, that's one of the natural, I guess you could call it a benefit of homeschooling, is that there are things that they have not yet been exposed to because simply they're not in a classroom, surrounded by other kids their age. And so one of the difficult things about public schooling is that oftentimes during the school day, the primary influencers of the kids are other kids their age, just because that's who they're around. And so there is that natural protection that happens when they're home anyway, because they're shielded from that. I think you can go overboard with that, and I think you can try to use that as a way to hold them back, or to keep them, and even hold them back a little too much, and to shelter them. And so while we see that that's a benefit of it, that's not the primary reason that we do it. It's just because we see, we see in Deuteronomy 6 that we were told to teach the things of the Lord diligently to our children when we wake up and when we lie down and when we walk along the way and when we rise, and all these different times. And I see that means that instruction is really just throughout life. And so homeschooling gives us that chance to take as much time as we need to be able to deal with things that maybe won't fit in a textbook. It may be working more on character, working more on developing some things spiritually. And so the protection is there, but it's not there by design. It's just one of the natural things that happens because of the model. But yeah, a lot of people do homeschool for that reason. And I think, hey, they're still homeschooling. I think there's still that desire to invest in the kids. But I don't think that we would say that protecting our kids from the world is our reason for doing it. It just is one of the things that is a natural occurrence or natural result of homeschooling.
Sure. And just kind of follow up in that, you mentioned as far as the kind of, some parents will kind of overdo it and maybe shelter a little too much.
Sure.
And I think we probably all heard that argument from somebody of, okay, well, your kids are going to be sheltered, or they're not going to be socialized.
Right.
And again, I think you have a great perspective that you grew up as a homeschool student, and now we're following that with your kids. So one, did you feel that way, especially when you got to college of, okay, this is really uncomfortable. Like maybe I haven't been in this environment, or your own kids in the homeschool environment that you guys have created. What do you do to keep them socialized or not sheltered? If that's
what was the primary social outlet, I guess you'd say, for me growing up was our church, being involved in the things we were actively involved in our church growing up. And so, I think that is the primary way that we had involvement outside the home. And so is my mom going to listen to this? I will say there are times that I felt sheltered, that I felt protected, even overly so. I think you could also look and say that every kid feels like that at some point or another. But I do remember experiencing times that happens. But I know that we were, as I said, actively involved in church. Even as a homeschool student, I know it sounds strange, but I played basketball all throughout for our homeschool group, all throughout middle school and high school. We actually homeschooled under an umbrella school that began some involvement in an athletic program that was connected to some other private schools in the area. And so we played basketball in middle school and in high school against other private schools. And so, there was some social interaction there that happened outside. And so there was, I think, enough of that to where I turned out fairly normal. Most people are surprised when they find out and they say, "Wow, you're homeschooled." I said, "Yeah, does that surprise you?" They said, "Yeah, you look normal." I'm like, "Yeah, I look normal." Surprised. How that looks today for my kids, very similar. I guess it goes without saying, serving in a church, my kids are involved in a lot of the things that the church does. And so that's the primary way that they're involved. Having the CC community days is another great way because, they're able to have some type of classroom environment. It's not necessary, but at the same time, it's great for them to learn some of these things with other children and to be able to maybe hear some questions that other kids ask that they may not have thought of. But so, through the community days of classical conversations through our church, I try to, as much as possible, when I have those opportunities, if there are things that I'm doing as a church, sometimes if it's a visit one night during our visitation time or going to make a hospital visit or something like that, I try to take a kid along with me because as well, it gives some life application to things that they're learning, but it allows them to learn how to interact socially with all kinds of generations, and so I see that there's that benefit there of, it may be something that they can go with me to do something because they are not sitting in a public school classroom. They can go with me because they're home and they can take a few minutes out of their day and go do this. And so that just, again, it's not by design that we can structure the day that way, but it's an added benefit of, because they are home, it gives us a chance to be able to kind of guide and to schedule their day and maybe do some things like that would build more of qualities of that we want to see in them grow versus something academically.
I think it just touches back on what you mentioned as far as like that character development.
Yeah.
That you guys are able to have a lot more hands-on,
yeah.
You and Kim, as far as really shaping who you want your child to be. Mm-hmm. So I think that's awesome. Yeah.
So you've mentioned a couple of things that you do without phrasing as, here are some tactical things I do as a dad. But so you mentioned that you mentioned life skills, and you just barely brushed on it earlier. But it sounded like this description of you taking a kid with you as part of your job, like things you're doing for your work, and you bring a kid along.
Right.
Immediately, I'm like, life skill. I hear this ding, 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 ding value.
Yeah.
You also mentioned you do lunch almost every day with the family.
Yeah, it just allows me, I live 5-7 minutes away from home, and so it's easy for me to, rather than bringing something to work and eat and be able to go home and spend that time, and gives them a break from what they're working on too, gives them, I hate to say something to look forward to because I don't feel like maybe I'm that important, but
I was not going to laugh during that.
Yeah, no, but it provides a break for Kim. I mean, it's the school has been going nonstop for 3-4 hours, and so it's lunch at home is a great way that I can be a part of what's happening during the day and not just when I get home later on after dinner.
So you mentioned taking them with you with work-related things. You come home from work to do lunch. You talked about setting goals in New Year's. Now I'd like to dig in. We've got a little bit of time. What is some of your advice for ways a homeschool dad can support his wife? Now, and I'm going to use this because it sounds, and I guess we've asked you, but do you have a specific role in the homeschool?
A specific role.
Like, do you
there is there
like, do you have the principal role, or like what is your role?
No, my role, there is not a specific dad covers this or this. My role is kind of that last line on many resumes, all of the duties as assigned. It's just whatever I can do. It's because I'm trying to figure out the right way to say this so it doesn't sound bad, but when I get home at the end of the day, if it's been a good day, the school's done. If it's not been a good day, that's a chance for me to jump in and say, tag, I got this, and be able to take it from there. And so there's not a set, we don't have a set of this is my responsibilities versus Kim's, but it's just as those things come up that I try to, and realize it doesn't happen all the time, but I try to say, hey, let me take care of this, and you take a break, go do something else. But it's not a cut and dried. This is mine. This is yours. It's really just based on the situation and what we're doing, how I can best help.
So, what are some ways that you help your wife?
Help with maybe getting things together for presentation for their community days. We sit down and kind of talk through presentations. And make sure things are there. A lot of it is even giving some time when she says, hey, I just need a few minutes. The kids have been pulling on me all day, and I feel like I'm surrounded by little people all the time. I need to see adults. Then it just is giving her that space to be able to, whether it's go just run to the store for a bit on our own or something else. But supporting her is just as much about what I can do outside of the school day as it is what can I do to aid the education that's taking place at home. So, I think if I were to give advice, it would be really maybe specific to what your wife needs, and maybe just be willing to ask them, how can I best serve you as you take on this role? And then be willing to follow through with what they say, because if you're going to ask the question, then make sure that you're willing to say, okay, because they're going to be honest with you. I found that is they need time as well. They need to be able to feel like that I'm a part of what's happening and I can take some things on. And so I think that I feel like I serve Kim best when I'm able to say, let me give you some amount of time just to be able to do something that you want to do on your own, or to go, whether there's some moms that are getting together and going to hang out and getting to have some adult time or whatever, that give her the ability to step outside the mom and the teacher roles and just be more of able to do some things for herself, because you think about it, as a stay-at-home mom and as a homeschool teacher, that is life for most of the day. And so to be able just to take a moment to step outside that role of serving others all the time and just be able to do something for herself to just I think that encourages a lot, and it just helps keep her when the days get long. It helps encourage her to know that that I am there, and I'm willing to kind of take some of that when I can and be there. So I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it does. And I think that I think the words you used, quoting her, I've just been around little people all day. I just want to talk to another adult. Yeah. I think every homeschool dad heard that and said, yep. I've heard those words. Yeah. Exactly. So I think that's fantastic. So I guess I'd like to dig in a little bit more tactically to that. So what's something that you do? Like when you take the kids away, When
Sure.
you're like, hey, honey, you stay here. I'm going to take the kids. We're leaving the house. Like, this is your, take a bath, whatever.
Sure.
What do you do with it? Like, what are some of the things you do with the kids when you remove them
It could
from
be
her
anything.
presence?
The bonus is when you take the kids and go take something off of her list that she was going to do, and so now you have the kids and you've checked something else off her list. So if it's returning library, I mean something as simple as returning library books, or running to the store and grabbing some things for something going on later in the week, taking the kids, just say, hey, I'm going to take them to the park for a little bit. Take them on a I mean, it didn't even have to be leaving the neighborhood, taking them, we're walking up to get the mail and going to walk around the block, just something like that. Something that just brings some quiet and just a moment for her to be refreshed a little bit and to say, I get a chance just to breathe and to be able to, like you said, just do something, whether it's spend time, going to take a bath, going to do something just for myself, to be able to say, hey, I need to do this just to chill out for a bit, because that then I have found just keeps her going, so that kind of helps provide some ability for her to relax a little bit. And so going and doing stuff with the kids, there's always something, and if I don't have something, they have it planned down. We need to go get an icy, we need to go take me to Busy Bee or something, so all I got to do is say, hey, what do you want to do? And
Get a donut. Yeah,
they have the plan, they have the list. So it could be anything, but like I said, if you can figure out something else that needs to be done anyway and to do that, that's a bonus.
I'm also curious. I think we're getting close to a good place to wrap this up, because I would literally keep asking you questions all day. I mean,
that's fine.
And I think this show is going to be a lot of fun, based on this experience. But anyway, so how often would you say you feel like you have to come in, or do you feel like you get to come in, like, rescue things? And I don't know if that's a weird way to ask that question, but I know in my experience, I come home, and if it's been a bad day, or if it's been 3 bad days in a row, maybe more specifically,
Sure,
I can feel it.
right.
You walk in the door, and it's like,
I
what
just
can
go
I
back
do?
to work.
Yeah.
I think I should take the kids and we should leave and we should do something. But,
Yeah.
So I'm curious, maybe how often, for someone, maybe a new homeschooling dad who's listening to this, and like,
Sure.
man, I'm gung ho about being a homeschool dad. There's these other things that we don't typically think about. We don't think about the fact that my wife, as much as I love her, is really sacrificing a lot.
It is. It's a big sacrifice. Yeah.
So how often do you come in and, like, take the kids away?
Take the kids and
you know
go.
what I mean?
It again, there's not, and maybe it would be a lot more successful if we had a set 2-3 times a week, but it's just when I can sense it. And a lot of times there'll be things that I'm going to go do anyway. And the kids just enjoy going with me. And so Brady's still at a young age where I'm like, hey, you don't have a choice, you're going. And then once he goes, the kids are like, yeah, I want to go. So, so it's never hard to get them to go. And sometimes it's just part of the natural flow of life. But I would say probably 2-3 times a week. And it may not be very long. It could just be to dump the trash at the dump and come back and work in the yard or something, but a couple times a week, just to be able to say, hey, I got them, and I want to be able to give you some time. So, but I would say, yeah, I think that's needed. Wives oftentimes are honest enough to say, I need this. And if your wife does say that, don't be quick to discount that or play it off. Realize that's something that I need to act on and be able to take them for a bit. Or let her go and you stay or whatever, but just say, hey, I've got this for a while, and why don't you just take a little bit and do something that you like to do, and just take some time and maybe de-stress a little bit, because homeschooling is a lot of times there's stress involved. I mean, it's just part of the natural thing is that's there. So to be able to as I said, step out of that role for a bit.
I think I just wanted to maybe on the last 2 questions, all right, for me,
Okay.
And then I'll leave you alone. But,
Okay. All right. Then I get to ask a few. Right?
Come on, yeah. But you mentioned, and I think I know, Stephen and I both come from, kind of we want a spiritual foundation for our kids as well, which you touched on several times. I mentioned the passage in Deuteronomy, and then like discipleship, that word.
Sure.
And so, for you, kind of maybe practically, how as a husband and a father, have you been able to put some things into place to know that you are discipling your family and your children?
Sure.
Again, as we talked earlier, like you had those kind of ambiguous things of I want to disciple my kids.
Right. But
how have you done that?
Sure. Yeah. What does it look like practically? I will say that this is one of the areas, believe it or not, as a pastor, one of the areas that I still see being molded and shaped, because I've seen.
Say it ain't so.
Huh?
Say it ain't so.
Well, it is, and it's difficult to say, because I realize that, and one of the things that I remind myself is that I, pour so much into the church and the families in the church, and yet I find it that I'm not showing the intentionality that I need to pour into my own family. Some of the things that we have done just is involve praying as a family, praying for things, praying with the kids before bed. We have started, and then I say started because we've started and stopped a couple times, but we have just taken some time in the morning to read some scripture together, and just to talk about some things, and not trying to take big chunks, but just to say, hey, these are some things that happened. We started in Genesis, and then when it started getting a little deep in some of the relations between some of the people in there, we thought, man, we need to jump over to another book and explain some of this later. But Caroline is at the point where she is learning some things on her own and wanting to read her Bible on her own and do a devotional. And so we're in this thing now where pretty much every night she wants me to help read through a devotional that she's working through right before bed. And so there's some just little things like that. There's not the overall strategy that you might think of there being this structure in place, but there are just things along the way that I've seen. Here's a great way that we can do some things to invest, and just praying that God will continue to show other ways that I can lead and can bring that development through for the kids.
I think that word intentional kind of keeps coming back to me. Like
yeah.
you gotta make the decision to do these things, and I know you talked about
on purpose.
Yeah, eating together.
It's priorities too, because I mean it's easy for the priorities to get all out of whack, and so the reminder that I have to give myself constantly is that my priority are my kids and my wife, my family. God's called me to ministry, but I think that. Primarily He's called me as a husband and as a father, and I get to minister along with that. And so I want to be careful that I don't mess up in making sure that I'm taking care of others spiritually, and yet not feeding my own family spiritually through the time that I spend with them.
I think that's a great point for probably a lot of working dads of our families being a priority. And I think just the last thing I wanted to ask, especially, Caroline's at the age now where I think she could really give a good answer. But what do your kids think about homeschooling? Like, are they gung ho? And I'm sure there's the good days and the bad days, but like, what's from your view? What's their perspective of
homeschooling? They've never known anything else, and so I think that they would say
ignorance is bliss.
They're 100% behind it, but I think they enjoy it. I think that, again, not because it's by design, but simply one of the natural results. It has helped our kids to grow closer together. Don't get me wrong, there's still that sibling rivalry there that happens, but I think that that's one of the great things about them being together so much, is that it helps their relationship out. And so I think that that's something they've enjoyed. They love getting to create things together and to play together, and so I think that they would say yes, they enjoy it. They may not always enjoy the schoolwork along the way. They have difficulties and problems as any kid does, but I think that overall they would want to continue in what they're doing, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think this has been a pretty profitable conversation. I'm putting you on the spot here, and if you don't have a great
answer, you've said that a number of times.
Well, it's a part of it comes along with it. If you had one thing you could say to a parents, but really we're talking to dads. Either maybe this dad is considering homeschooling, or maybe they're a year in, or maybe they're 5 years in. Who knows? I mean, you've been doing this for a while. What singular piece of advice would you give to a dad who is
considering homeschooling, or
let's say considering?
Okay.
Let's say considering. I mean, I suspect the folks listening are probably practitioners and just want to be better. But let me rephrase that. What's the singular piece of advice you would give to a dad who wants to be more involved in his homeschool?
I think one of the biggest things for dads to remember is that the decision for homeschooling was not, hopefully was not a decision that one parent made against the other's will. It was a decision they made together. And so because of that, the commitment to homeschooling and all that comes out of that is a continuing commitment together. And so, we've talked about some tactical things. We've talked about some practical ways of being involved, but I think it does have the long-term approach of where are my kids going? How is this bringing them up? Where is this, leading them and leading my family? But I think it's that big picture idea of realizing that I have a part that I can play, and not saying, my wife's got this and I'll just come in and save the day when I need to, but it's being involved in the mundane day-to-day things that really demonstrate to your wife and to your kids that this is something that I value, and it's something that I see that is beneficial, and something that I hope that as I instill into them, they see the value of it, and then when they have kids one day, that my grandkids will be able to have the same kind of experience, and them being able to learn from their parents and to be brought up in the way that they feel like is best for them. So
That's fantastic. That's
Great.
I like it. For our first interview, that was fantastic. So I got to tell you, I really think that it's very possible we could ask you to come back for a second round at some point. But I think this has been great. I appreciate you giving us the time to talk to us, and I hope the listeners the 3 people out there that are listening.
All our moms. Yeah.
I hope
it's just dads, right? No moms listening.
Yeah, right.
I don't want to be accountable or anything like that.
No.
I hope that they were able to pull out some value in this, and I'm really excited. Like I heard some things that I think I'll be able to apply. So I think this is fantastic. I really appreciate you giving us the time.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
You're awesome, man. Appreciate you.